Here shall the press the people's rights maintain, unawed by influence and unbribed by gain. I happen to believe that newspapering is an honorable, even a noble calling. I think that letting people know what's going on in the community is one of the most responsible things that you can do. I have always liked the name Mirror for a newspaper because it lets people see exactly what the situation is without distortion, and I've always felt that as a calling, and I like to promote it that way.
All right, historian, go for it.
I think a lot of Henry Countyans don't realize how many newspapers this county has had over its history.
That's right.
There's been over 20. I don't know the exact count, but there's been over 20 newspapers in the life of Henry County. Most of them, of course, lasted a very short time. And most of those were in the 19th century. Quite a few, several others, I think, in the early part of the 20th century. Some in my time, but we go back to the Weekly Intelligencer, founded in 1866, right after the Civil War. J.D.C. Atkins was one of the principals in that newspaper, and it was the one that survived. A year or two later, the Parish Post was founded.
All right.
Or a year or two later, the Post and the Intelligencer merged. Named it the Post Intelligencer. It was a weekly paper for 63 years.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
50, 60.
An Intelligencer, by the way, is a spreader of intelligence. It was an old-time name for a newspaper.
Right.
That when
Oftentimes, yeah.
And Post is obvious. That there was a newspaper called the Parish Post because it was mailed, I guess. So the Post merged with the Intelligencer under one ownership.
Yeah, we're the only remaining PI in the country that prints. For a long time, there were two Post Intelligencers in the United States. Both of them from merging, and you get this odd name, the Post Intelligencer, by merging a Post, and which was a common name for newspaper, and merging an Intelligencer, which was a common name for newspapers. And you get the merger there, and you get the Post-Intelligencer. And there was only one other in Seattle, Washington, which was a big city paper. And Granddaddy was out there for a meeting one time, and actually because he was also the editor, the publisher of a PI. He got to go up to the publisher's. I think he called it a penthouse, but he said the whole top floor of a building was the publisher's office, and he said the whole Paris PI would fit inside this publisher's office. Yeah. So every once in a while, you'll have, it's sort of like Memphis having the commercial appeal, and a lot of times you'll have hyphenated names, a Post-Dispatch in St. Louis or whatever, but where papers have merged. But
when my grandfather bought the paper, 1927, it was a weekly newspaper, and he converted it to a daily in 1930. And the real story, as far as the story PI concerned, involves, as you very well know, the early years when the Depression. My grandfather had worked for several newspapers in Alabama. He was born in Alabama.
And they were all big papers, weren't they? Or?
Well, he worked for the Birmingham News. He was a district route manager, circulation route manager. And then he got into the news management side. He worked for the Tuscaloosa News in Alabama for a while. He managed to invest in and got a part ownership in that paper, but then it was sold, and he moved to Florence, Alabama, Florence Times, and got part ownership of the Florence Times, and it was sold. As a result of those sales, he wound up with a cash pot of $5,000, I believe it was, which in the 20s was a lot of money, $5,000. And he decided that the best way to keep from having newspapers sold out from under him was to own his own newspaper. And so he tried to look around and try and see what he could get for $5,000. It's truth. And I believe it was in the Publishers Auxiliary, a national newspaper for newspapers, that he saw an advertisement for this little paper in Tennessee for sale. It looked like it would be a reasonable price. And it was the PI, of course. And got in touch with the owner, a man named Wallace Edwards. And Thanksgiving weekend, 1927, my granddaddy came to Paris to talk with Mr. Edwards. He brought along for company his second son, Bryant, my father, who was a 12-year-old boy at the time, and negotiated with Mr. Edwards and reached a deal to buy on that weekend trip. Mr. Edwards gave him very liberal terms. The $5,000 down and pay a little bit as they could from time to time. Very liberal terms. So my granddaddy left my dad here with it's either the Tollers or the Johnsoniuses, one of the established families in town. I think it was Claude Toller.
Okay. It wasn't Fisher Neal?
No, Fisher Neal was involved,
attorney.
but I believe he actually stayed with the Tollers. I'm not quite sure about that. Went back to Alabama to get his brood, the other 5 kids, and a cat and a dog, and all their household belongings and a Model T Ford. And hit the road. I can just imagine what that trip was like. Florence, out long before the days of interstates, of course, in a Model T Ford in early December.
Yeah.
And of course, came to the paper here. It was a very small paper. There was another paper in town, the Parisian, which was bigger, better established. It was owned by a man who had been the mayor of Paris, and he didn't think much of having this competition from this upstart from Alabama. Called him a squirt, and a furious newspaper war broke out between the two. Mm-hmm. My cousin Jimmy writes the years ago column.
Yeah, history. Yeah, the
PI history column that runs on page 3.
500 years ago.
Yeah, right. And some of the things they said to each other would just blow your mind today. My grandfather actually carried a pistol for self-protection. I mean, it was that vicious. It was just mean. And at best I can understand, my granddaddy gave as good as he got. He was a feisty fella. And with so many mouths to feed and such heavy competition to face, it didn't help at all when right around the corner was the Great Depression. The bank that he had his money in closed. Didn't make much difference because he didn't have any money in there anyway. All kinds of tales of people paying for subscriptions and advertising with sweet potatoes and peanuts and all that kind of stuff. They like to starve to death. Well, excuse me. No, I'll take that back. They never went hungry, but they certainly were broke. And for instance, they were running. They had one beat-up linotype machine. This is in the hot metal days, and a hand-fed 2-page press, and very little other equipment. And many times, or at least several times, they would have enough money to drive to Jackson to buy enough sheets of paper to print that week's paper on, and have no idea where their money was coming from for the next week. You know, it was that tight. And several times my grandfather said, "Well, that's it. We're just going to have to fold up the tent and go bankrupt." And my grandmother would say, "Let's get out one more."
Kept pushing him to go do one more.
And a strange thing happened in 1930. That was 1 year into the Depression. My grandmother's rich bachelor uncle died. And left some money to her. I think it was around $5,000. I'm not sure the amount of money. It was several $1,000s that was bequeathed to her. And I think that literally saved the PI from extinction. And my grandmother said to my grandfather, who was getting pretty discouraged in all this, "What you know best is running a daily paper. That's what you've always done." At Tuscaloosa, at Florence, Alabama, at Birmingham, they were daily newspapers. And he said, "That's what you know to do. Why don't you make this one a daily?" So on June 2nd, 1930,
This tiny little paper.
became a daily. It just blows my mind to think about the logistics of it. And the opposition derided the thing, made fun of it. And he would run little items in his paper. Another Jerkwater Daily goes bankrupt. Some newspaper somewhere, it closed down. He said another Pee Wee Daily bites the dust, and sort of stuff. And my granddaddy crowed so much about being a daily that the other guy wouldn't have gone daily for the world. He just, but he prevailed.
Wow.
The act of putting out a daily newspaper appealed to people.
It's what turned the tide eventually, yeah.
Turned the tide. Years later, my granddaddy bought that other paper. We published it for a while on our own and then discontinued it. But, for that feat and for the fact that my grandfather also went on to buy 2 other daily newspapers and operated 3 at one time. He was Tennessee Press Association put him in its newspaper Hall of Fame.
That's right.
Wow.
His portrait hangs in Knoxville, right beside Grantland Rice.
Yeah, I just saw it recently. Went to a UT football game in Circle Park up there, so it's right along Circle Park.
Right by the stadium, yeah.
Yeah, and you still see it hanging there. Never get tired of hearing that story.
Yeah. We
A lot of
we cherish that.
a lot of grit and determination, in my great grandparents, his grandparents.
Yeah. My granddaddy was a, as I said, was a feisty kind of guy. He mellowed in his old age, but much of the time, I can remember him as a pretty tense, chain-smoking guy, very, very, very intense and whatnot. He had an office. once he began to prosper, one of the things that happened, the PI originally was located on Market Street, next door to where Wallen Hardware was. Okay.
Right.
And one of the first signs of prosperity was that we moved into a building where Greer and Greer Attorneys are located now.
Yeah.
That building was built for the PI and rented to the PI, but it was built specifically to house our operation.
Was it Fisher Neal who did that? Or?
No, somebody else. Yeah. And my granddad had a private office. Of course, it's about the size of a telephone booth. Had a private office up in the front there where he would write things, and he would write editorials on the typewriter. You know, we had an old printer, Bennett Coleman, who would hear the typewriter going clackety clack clackety clack 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 clack, really firing away. Said, "Well, Mr. Williams is writing an editorial about TVA again." Anyway. Then in 1949, he built the present building. After just moved into the other building in 1939, 9 years after going daily, and then 10 years after that, built the present building we've been in ever since. He had enough foresight to build a building that would change we could change through the years to meet our needs.
Right. Because I can remember when we had an office supply. Virgil Clark's had the office supply on one end, and there was a print shop on the other end.
Yeah, we had a rental space on one side and an office supply store on the other side. The newspaper kind of in the middle there.
Yeah. And,
my granddaddy's office as publisher was where our file room is now, just inside the front door.
Yeah, right, where the microfilm reader is now. Yeah.
Right. That was his office. That was originally a rental office space. We had an optometrist office in there. We had the treasure house, a gift shop.
Oh, really?
In there. Yeah, we had several occupants in that side before we finally felt the need to occupy it ourselves.
Right. But it's served us well. And I think now, one of Papa's oldest son, Percy, who was with BPU, did he design the building, or what was his involvement?
No. Well, I'm not sure. Jimmy would have to tell us that. I'm not sure what Uncle Percy's involvement was.
It seems like that's what I've heard Jimmy talk about, how he designed the building. Now, I forget who built it.
Frank Barrett.
Frank Barrett
built it. And it's built like Fort Knox.
Oh, it is.
If they were flooded, it'd probably float. It's got so much concrete in it. It's just a
we ever have a huge
basement.
earthquake, I tell everybody it'll just slide down the hill, the whole building. It'll separate from the front sidewalk there and just slide down the building, but it'll stay intact. Because we had to cut through the floor for the folder for the press.
Yeah.
And had quite a bit of trouble, as I understand, cutting through all that steel rod reinforcement and everything.
Yeah. Built to last.
Yeah, it'll last forever.
My father, of course, grew up in the paper, like I did. He was 12 years old when the family moved to Paris, and would come down after school and work. I think everybody in the whole blooming family probably, they had 7 kids. And
that was their workforce.
I think everybody helped out one way or the other. But Dad grew up in the paper, and all of his brothers and sisters, I think, worked there at one time or another in a different way. My Uncle Jim, for instance, worked in the back shop as a printer. My dad worked in the front end as a reporter and writer, editor, that kind of stuff. And
he sold advertising too for a long time, didn't he?
I'm sure he did. Yeah. It was you were a jack of all trades in those days. That's when the office supply business began, by the way, when we were over there on Poplar Street.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
Poplar.
had a van. We fitted out with shelves and drove
right.
a route.
The portable office supply business.
Yeah, drove a route going around to various places selling office supplies. And we had a WTPR newscasting booth in there too.
Wow.
It was literally the size of a telephone booth in one corner of the newsroom, and the first newscasts that WTPR, as a brand new radio station, carried were broadcast from the PI office by PI staff who would step into the phone booth and read the day's news over.
Pretty neat.
For the time, yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, my dad was in the news side. My parents married in 1933. Fresh out of high school, ran off and got married. My grandmother was highly insulted and sniffed and said that marriage won't last 6 months. And my parents almost observed their 75th wedding anniversary.
Yeah, within less than a year, yeah.
Yeah.
Past 74 years and almost made it to 75.
Yeah, but anyway, my grandfather was furious, and my dad had to argue and twist his arm and everything else to get a pay raise. He was making $7 a week, and he wanted to have it raised to $8 or $9. I forget now which it was, because he was married and had to support a family. Which tells you something about how it was in the Depression.
Yeah.
Then along came World War II, and of course all the young men went off to war, and there's my grandparents running the paper.
All four of them went into the. Lee did too, didn't he?
The four sons,
Yeah.
the four older sons, all went into the service. The two girls were married to servicemen. Ernest came along. The war was over by the time he was old enough. He went into the Army eventually, but not in wartime.
He's only 2 years older than you.
3 years.
3 years older.
Yeah, he was born in 31. My Uncle Jim was the I guess war hero of the bunch. He was a half-track commander in the Army. He was decorated for action in the Battle of the Bulge. He was right in the middle of that conflict. Just today I was looking through some old stuff and came across an editorial that my grandfather wrote in June of 1944, and he said that 1 year ago today he was agonizing over, he was trying to write an editorial and he couldn't concentrate because he had just gotten news that the Germans had attacked the Americans at their weakest point in Belgium, and the Battle of the Bulge was on, and he knew that his son Jim was there, and he was torn up.
Wow.
And while he was agonizing, a minister, he didn't identify who it was, came in and said, "Could I pray?"
Yeah.
How about that?
My dad was an anti-aircraft artillery platoon leader
And both of them.
in Patton's Third Army.
Yeah.
At the time World War II ended, his unit was the furthest east of any in the United States Army. He got further toward Russia than any other unit in the United States Army.
Wow. And did both Uncle Jim and I think Renee said both he and Uncle Jim at least got glimpses of Patton during the war.
I know my dad did. He was in Patton's Third Army, and he would see Patton from time to time.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about Uncle Jim. Then My Uncle Lee was in the Navy. He was an ensign in the Navy, saw action in the Pacific. My Uncle Percy, my dad's older brother, about 1 year, was also in the Navy, but he didn't. I don't think he was in combat. Served in the Navy. The older daughter was married to an Army officer, Army lieutenant, and the younger daughter was married to an enlisted man who was stationed at Camp Tyson.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, that's where she met him, was Camp Tyson, and married him.
Yeah, at a USO club or whatever.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that. Anyway, Dad came back after the war and picked up sort of where he had left off. But you know, he was no longer a kid. He was mature man and ambitious, and had ideas of his own. And my grandfather had been had to fight so hard all his life for everything that he ever got. He couldn't turn loose. He was too much of a war horse to turn over control to anybody. And he had fallen out when I was in college. My dad pulled up stakes, left the paper, and moved to Columbia, Tennessee. Went to work for the Columbia Daily Herald as advertising manager or something like that, business manager, something like that.
That's right.
Yeah. And it was, let's see how long. Well, 1860, about 4 years, 3 or 4 years. I was in Columbia, and my grandmother got to reasoning with her husband. She said, "You're not getting any younger. And this newspaper needs to have a future, you know."
And they were all gone by then, weren't they? Had Uncle Ernest entered the ministry yet?
Let's see.
Because he became editor.
I'm not sure. It's about that same time. But Jim, by that time, had become publisher of the newspaper in Murray that my grandfather had bought. And Eunice's husband, Byron Mitchell, had become editor of the paper in Fulton, Kentucky that he had bought. So they weren't around. Percy, the oldest son, wasn't interested in the newspaper business. He became a civil engineer, worked for the Board of Public Utilities. Lee was in academia. He was a university professor. He ran the Fulton paper for a little while, but went back into higher education.
And Gene was in Chicago by
Gene
now?
was in Chicago, married to a printer in Chicago, and who's going to run this paper?
Yeah.
You know. So they reconciled. My granddaddy mellowed in his old age, and he read the handwriting on the wall, and called my dad back to come take over the paper, which he did, and ran it very successfully until his retirement.
In 80, 81, or is that your retirement?
Let's see.
Yours was 90.
No, I retired in '99. When did Dad retire?
80 or 81, I want to say. About the time
Probably about
I was graduating college. But yeah, a lot of stories of Granddaddy as publisher.
Yeah. One of the things he did. This was during the time when newspapers were going away from hot metal printing to offset printing, and we had not made that conversion. And my dad led that action, almost over my granddaddy's dead body, but not quite. I had graduated from Murray State in '56, and was an ROTC graduate. They shipped me and my pregnant wife off to Oklahoma to do some Fort Sill cannon cocking.
Well, did you get to You went to the commercial? No.
I worked for a short while my wife. I asked for a delay in active duty. My wife had 9 months to go to finish up her schooling in Memphis as a dental hygienist. So I got a job with the Press Semister, which is the old afternoon paper in Memphis. I cherish the fact that I was personally hired by, what's Mr. Meeman's first name? Edward J. Meeman, the publisher, fairly well known, fairly famous editor, hired me personally. We printed I was the editor, business manager, or something like that at the time at the college paper in Murray, and we printed it once a week at a weekly newspaper in Murray. And I was down at the print shop one night, and the phone rang. It was Mr. Meeman on the other end of the phone.
How about
hired me on the spot. It was very generous of him because I was only going to be there 9 months before I had to go in the Army. But he was very gracious and had some valuable experience working for that.
I bet.
To me, a huge paper.
Yeah.
And then after a brief tour of active duty, I didn't want any part of career Army business. I got a job. My dad was still in Columbia. I got a job at the Tullahoma News, and we moved to Tullahoma, where
that's where I was born.
Michael B. Williams was born while we were living there.
My older sister was born out in Oklahoma.
Yeah. She was born courtesy of Uncle Sam's Army.
Yes.
And we lived in Tullahoma until 1960. Moved back to Paris in 1960. Been here ever since. Hadn't been able to find another line of work.
Anything else to do?
No.
It was sort of late in the game, I guess. It was really when I got in high school and took Ann Landini journalism classes under Ann Landini, and finally began working at the PI after school in summers. Matter of fact, we used to have I want to say it was the TV section that came out once a week at the time, TV schedules. And one of the things we had in there was something called Grandmother's Corner, which is where people could send in a picture of their grandkids to brag, sort of a brag corner. And the first thing those had stacked up and sort of gotten behind. So that was my first job, was to type up at the PI, was type up the little cut lines to go underneath the pictures for the Grandmother's Corner. And one summer I spent the whole summer, I think, catching up on the library had gotten way behind on filing and all, and I spent a whole summer catching up on the filing, and what's now our newsroom was the morgue, was the library, and where we had somebody who'd cut up the paper and storage we needed to save for future use. We'd rubber cement them to a piece of paper and date them and put them in a file, and we still have those files in our basement right now, and that's where I got to look for pictures of some of the old PI photos. They'll have a lot here, but there'll be some. I'm hoping at the PI there. But I spent a summer doing that, and odd jobs like that. So I came up through went to the journalism. You could only take journalism 2 years at high school at the time, of course. 7th, 8th, and 9th were still at Grove, so the high school was 3 years. For 10th, 11th, 12th were up at the high school. And I graduated in 77 from the high school. And so 76 and 77 I took journalism classes and was on the First Amendment, the newspaper for the high school. Followed Dad to Murray State. Murray State was nice. It was nice and close by and all. But I was able to get a full academic scholarship to go to Murray State, so that was nice, you know.
Very nice.
Couldn't turn that down and go somewhere else, you know. So, but I was already in high school. I started dating my sweetheart Yvonne Freeland, and who also went to Murray State, and that was another reason I didn't want to go somewhere else, you know. We made it 2 years through college before we gave up and got married, and lived our last 2 years at college in the married housing at Murray State. Usually worked at the PI summers, and would come home for the summers and work at the PI, and except for my last summer at college, I worked at the Tennessee and in Nashville, and that was my big city experience. It wasn't 9 months; it was only 3 months. But after college, I went off to East Tennessee. Worked at a paper for 3 years in La Follette, Campbell County, north of Knoxville, which was let's see, I graduated college in 81, so I was there from 81 to 84, and I believe it was 82 is when the Knoxville hosted the World's Fair, so that's pretty neat. I was just 30 miles or 30 minutes away from the World's Fair, so we had newspaper passes Yvonne and I were able to use to get into the World's Fair, you know, and so we spent a lot of time checking out the World's Fair and enjoying that. It was a neat time to be over there in East Tennessee. I don't think I ever went to a football game while I was there. I don't know. And that close to Knoxville and all. But I made a lot of trips back to Knoxville to go to football games since then, but I don't think I went to a single one while I was there. But I moved back here in 84, and I've been here ever since. Joe Hedges was the news editor under Dad, but Dad shipped him off to run a paper in Camden for a while there, on the Camden Chronicle, and that was one of the reasons he asked me to come back in '84, and so I followed Joe and became a news editor, and was there for a long time until Dad was getting close to retirement, but both Granddaddy and Dad, remembering Pawpaw's reluctance to turn it over, made sure to make provisions to turn things over in a more orderly, easier way without family squabbles or anything. So
yeah, that was very gracious of my father. I mean, he didn't want to repeat that schism.
He didn't want that to happen. Yeah.
And so he made very definite plans. For me, and
then you followed suit.
I'll tell you a true story. We have 4 kids. Michael's number 2. The others are all girls. When they were teenagers, we gathered
right out on the deck.
Right out there on the back deck. Told them that we love you all, and we hope to be able to help provide for you and our wills, in the future, best we can, evenly as possible. But the newspaper goes to whoever devotes themselves to it. And all 4 of them, at one time or another, worked at the newspaper, doing something. But Michael's the only one that stuck with it. So everybody else found a legitimate line of work.
Yeah. My older sister Cindy is teaching at Murray State, and her husband works at Murray State too, Jim Barnett. And my next sister Julie, and she's now in Florida. She's married to Doug Ray, who was on a team just recently won a Pulitzer Prize when he was at the Tuscaloosa paper. With that tornado, remember the huge tornado went through, and they won a Pulitzer Prize for the coverage of that, and he was the editor at the time, and which was sort of interesting. That brought us full circle. I don't know if you remember us talking, but that was one of the papers that his grandfather, my great grandfather, worked at. Was
when
Tuscaloosa.
My dad was born in 1914, his daddy was general manager of the Tuscaloosa News. which was then a little weekly newspaper. And they attended First Presbyterian Church in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Then until, 6 months ago?
Yes.
Until 6 months ago, my daughter and her husband lived in Tuscaloosa. He was executive editor of the Tuscaloosa News, and they attended First Presbyterian Church in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. What goes around comes around, you know. That was amazing.
A small world, yeah.
Yeah.
And his grandmother, my great grandmother, was born in around Florence, Alabama.
My granny?
Granny.
No, she's born in Tullahoma.
She was born in Tullahoma.
She's Tullahoma.
She was born in
She's
Tullahoma, and I was
Tennessee
born in Tullahoma.
Yeah, right.
You know, so it keeps going in these circles. It's sort of neat things. But they're now down in Florida. They went from the heart of Tide Country to the middle of Gator Nation. They're in Gainesville, Florida. He's running the big paper there in Gainesville.
And Julie's a UT fan.
Yes, she's still. Yeah. The orange doesn't stick out as much in Gainesville as it did at Tuscaloosa, you know. But in my and his youngest daughter, my youngest sister Joan, is now living in the house that his grandparents built. Now my sister's living up there. So yeah, and she works as a wildlife as a ranger at a wildlife refuge. Yeah. Yvonne and I, a childhood sweetheart I married. Yvonne and we've been married now 33 years. How long you mother been married? You got married when?
Oh, goodness.
Quick, Dad. Yeah.
56.
So I was going to say, when I remember the 50th quite a while back, the 50th anniversary. So we're slowly trying to catch up with me and Granddaddy's 75 years there. Don't rush us, but we have 3 kids, and 2 of them are. Our oldest son Daniel is 27, and he's the office manager running the business arm of the PI. And now our daughter Katie is 25, and she's the receptionist at the front counter. And our baby is Matthew. He's already 18 years old. Got to vote in his first presidential election just recently, and he's a senior at Henry County High School. We've told the 3 of them the same thing. There's plenty of room for all 3 of you at the PI. So essentially, I told them the same thing. You don't want to end up with a business fracture between even brothers and sisters. You know, somebody's got to it's got to end up in somebody's control, obviously. But as much as possible, as any of our 3 wants to be involved, they're going to be involved in having involved with the business decisions and things like that. So the future looks bright. I'm the 4th generation now to be editor and publisher of the paper. The 5th generation's chomping at the bit in the wings there.
Something that also should be mentioned in history of the PI is the fact that my dad, Bryant Williams, served a year as president of Tennessee Press Association, the statewide association of newspapers.
That's right.
And then I served a year as president of Tennessee Press Association. And this year, Michael is the president of Tennessee Press Association. That's the first 3rd generation president the association's ever had.
That's right.
Where 3 generations have. And Daniel, when he was a kid, went to a Tennessee Press Association convention, and we were signing him up, registering at the desk, and certain members had ribbons that they wore on their badges that indicated a certain position. The president had one color, and board members had another color, and
Past
newcomers had another color, and so forth. And he said, "Have you got a color for future presidents?"
Yeah. Oh, yes, and of course, this Hall of Fame that his grandfather, my great grandfather, is already in. His dad, my grandfather Bryant, is not quite eligible yet. You have to be deceased 5 years, so we got a little more time here. But I don't think it's going to be too far down the road before he becomes the second generation in our family to be honored as a member of the Tennessee Hall of Fame. So that's pretty neat. I also want to mention we've mentioned all these Williams men. He talked a lot about his grandmother because the PI would not have survived without her involvement and input. Her inheritance, but a lot more than that. Her day-to-day involvement. She was very involved, and his mother, Bryant's wife, Julia, was likewise heavily involved. It got to the point where my mother was a dental hygienist, and she didn't end up having to work at the PI. Got to skip one there, but my wife Yvonne is the business manager of the PI. And she's been heavily involved with the PI for several years. So of our family of five, my family of five, four of us are working at the PI, and one's working part-time. He's been covering some sports things this week, taking some sports pictures. Middle school basketball he's been covering. So he's already involved some, although he says he plans to go into the ministry. He wants to preach. And so he's making plans to become a preacher. Go to college and go to preacher school and become a preacher. So he may not work. He may not end up working. Probably won't be a fifth one ends up working there. He'll be otherwise, and he'll be working more directly for the Lord. A lot of people think newspapers are going to shrivel up and die and go away, and no longer have newspapers. They'll all be on iPads and electronic tablets or whatever. I don't see that, especially in rural areas, small town areas, older populations. I can't see that happening. People like to have that newspaper and hold it. I think we have a solid future. We have obviously expanded the ways we're getting news out to people. We have a website, send out things on Twitter and Facebook and things like this, to keep up with the times and all this kind of thing. People, however people want to get the news, I foresee us getting the news to them that way. But I don't see those presses stopping. I don't see us getting away from ink on paper, on newsprint, anytime soon. Maybe the next generation down, but I think there's a very bright future there. Talk about all the doom and gloom stories where newspaper circulation has diminished and all, and that's true, especially at the larger papers. Papers like the Tennessean that used to try to send papers all the way across the state and be the state's newspaper. Well, they didn't make much money or lost money on the fringes, and they had all these metro papers had to shrink the area, and did so, and while people were talking about doom and gloom, they shrunk their circulation, but still made money hand over fist. They were doing quite well when they got back to the basics and stuck to what they really knew and areas they really could really cover and things like that. All along in rural areas, newspapers have continued to do pretty well. People, it's we've been affected in tough economic times just like everybody else, because one of the first things people want, businesses want, think is okay to cut back on is advertising. That we cut back on that, and that's where our bread and butter is people advertising. So we obviously have to hunker down and make it until times are better. But I think things are very bright.
We rise and fall with the local economy.
Absolutely.
More than with trends in national newspaper. It depends on the local economy. If Paris dries up and blows away, so will the PI.
Yeah.
We're a community community paper.
Very much so. We do our best to modernize and stay with, got computers all over the building and digital cameras and recently bought a fancy machine called a CTP, which is computer to plate, where the computer image is sent to a machine and it comes out on an aluminum plate to fasten onto our press run. Hadn't been that long ago since we bought one of the units of the press, a 3-color unit, to improve the color capacity of our press. Because when Granddaddy bought that press, he never envisioned anything more than spot color every once in a while. Didn't envision full color printing. It wasn't set up that way. So we keep changing and adapting with the times, and we'll continue to do so. And if I could quote our motto on the editorial page, unawed by what's it say?
Here shall the press the people's rights maintain, unawed by influence and unbribed by gain.
There we go. We are already very proud of the heritage that, starting with his grandparents, have passed on to us. The grit, the determination, the hard work, all the things they've done, all the 1,001 ways that they've been involved over the years in supporting things around Paris and Henry County. You're involved in the newspaper. You're involved in the community, and they're just 1,000 things around here that have fingerprints of my great grandfather, my grandfather, my father. He just finished up the presidency of the Habitat for Humanity, and he's still working right now on a Habitat house, and you'll still find him up on the roof. He's
My wife has forbidden me from rooftop work.
Okay, that's coming to an end finally.
She's grounded me. Yeah.
Okay. What, you're almost 80 and she finally told you to stop climbing up on the roof, So, there's all kind of things, not just at the newspaper, not just newspaper things, but around the community, where our family has been heavily involved, and we're quite proud of that. A little over 25 years ago, Dad is the one who came up with the idea of having catfish racing in Henry County. So we have catfish races because Dad saw that in a story about one in Mississippi or someplace, some other place, and decided, hey, that'd be neat at the world's biggest fish fry to have catfish racing. So for the last 25 years, we've been racing catfish. And that's just one small thing the PI sponsors that, but the beneficiary is the Literacy Council. It gets the profits from that, and hopefully the community enjoys. There's not too many places in the country you can go and grab onto a live catfish and go racing. We're proud of the. I am anyway. I'm proud of the heritage, the things that our family has been involved in so far, and hopefully by the time children, grandchildren, great grandchildren see this, there'll be other generations involved in more things we've been involved in, and the PI will still be going strong.